Have you ever realized that a single small decision, a moment so subtle it almost goes unnoticed, can shift the course of your entire destiny? People often think that big changes come with loud actions, roaring sounds, or slamming doors. But the truth is different. Sometimes, a blink of an eye, a quiet breath, or a silent step is all it takes to bring down a tower that has stood for centuries. Science has shown that the human brain can make a decision in just 200 milliseconds, even before the conscious mind is aware of it. That means some choices happen beyond the reach of logic, not measured by words, but agreed upon in a mysterious place between the soul and the creator. And sometimes, those decisions are the invisible moves that change the entire game of fate. Chosen one, you have made a move like that. Others thought you were still sitting at the table, still in the game, holding the pieces, watching each move closely. They didn't realize you had unplugged the board. All they saw was the rules suddenly disappear, the old house where they once played their games collapse under their feet. They didn't hear a door close. They just saw dust rise, bricks fall, and you walking toward the light. The world may call it running away, but in truth, it is liberation. You didn't abandon the game. You stepped into a whole new dimension where the old rules no longer apply. Psalm 18:19 says, "He brought me out into a spacious place. He rescued me because he delighted in me." You were taken out of that cramped room where the loops never ended, into a wide open space where the wind and light move freely. And when that happened, you didn't just change your own path. You shook the chains that had bound generations before you. Because cycles are not afraid of those who fight them. They fear those who disappear. Patterns survive through unconscious participation, repeated emotions, choices, and reactions. But when you step away from the wheel, even one that spins endlessly, it begins to slow down and eventually stops. But the truth is, you paid a price to make that decision. No one leaves the old house without first walking through its darkness. No one tears down the veil of illusion without first being blinded by it. Chosen one. You once sat in that room where the walls held the memories of your bloodline, where the ceiling hung scripts written long ago. You heard the familiar voice of the past calling you. Do as your ancestors did. Fall where they fell. Repeat what they repeated. And at times, you nearly believed there was no way out. But in that very moment, a small shift happened. Not a scream, not a blazing war, just a soft touch on the deepest part of your being. Like a golden speck of dust falling on still water, sending ripples outward without end. That was the invisible move. And in that second, the old blueprint began to crack. The walls trembled. The room collapsed, and you were brought outside. People will say you have changed. But the truth goes deeper. You didn't just change. You ended an old history. You walked through a gate generations before you never saw, and stepped into a land without maps. In that space, you stood in wide open light, and everything seemed to breathe with you. Picture it, an ancient house crumbling behind you, stone and dust crashing down, but you never look back. Before you lies a vast field, an endless sky, golden light resting on every blade of grass. In that place, you know you were chosen, not to be trapped, but to be free. And from that freedom, a new journey begins. The most powerful part is not that the house fell, but that its foundation vanished too. There is nothing left to rebuild, nothing left to pull you back. And when the foundation is gone, a new battlefield unfolds, where the rules have completely changed, and your steps will carve out paths that have never existed in the history of the soul. As the dust of the old house still lingers behind you, you step into unfamiliar ground. No more walls, no more ceilings crashing down, just an open sky above you, and inside your chest, a new rhythm begins to rise. It's not the beat of fear, nor the rush of fleeting excitement. It's the pulse of a soul finally set free. Everything within you starts to realign. The fragments from the past no longer find a place to cling. And in that moment, you realize you haven't just broken the cycle, you've touched the very root of it. Picture a house being torn down. The walls are demolished, the bricks scattered, but the blueprint still hides in a drawer. All it takes is someone to find it. And the same house will rise again, with the same cracks, the same dim corners. This is how cycles repeat, generation after generation. People believe they've escaped, but really, they're walking in circles, drawn by an old design. But you're different. You did what few dare to do. You walked into the unseen space, deep where the blueprint was hidden, and you burned it. No more architecture, no more foundation, no place left for the cycle to restart. That's why, when others try to play the same old game with you, it all falls flat. The words that once carried weight now echo in emptiness. The old tactics that once bound you feel like arrows shot into the wind. Some may try familiar emotions, blame, guilt, nostalgia, to pull you back. But it's like pressing buttons on a machine that's been unplugged. Nothing happens but silence. Others may stage drama, tangled relationships, hoping to spark the familiar explosion. But everything lands in nothingness. The wires are cut, the doors are locked, and you're no longer a victim, no longer a fighter. You've simply removed the life force from the entire script, and in that silence, a truth rings clear. You erased the blueprint. You didn't just break the pattern. You took away its foundation, and now it cannot return. Those who once believed they could sway you now find themselves confused. Their tricks no longer work. They think your personality changed. But the truth goes deeper. You've removed the soil where tangled seeds once grew. You are no longer the ground where the old cycles take root. Psalm 42:2 says, "He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand." That's exactly what happened. You weren't just pulled out of the mud. The pit itself was filled. There is no way back. And now, standing on solid ground, with the light shining down, you see this is not just a new beginning. It is a complete reconstruction, but that work is not light. Few speak of the exhaustion in this journey. Because to go where the blueprint is kept deep in the subconscious, in the bloodline, in ancestral memory, is not for the faint of heart. It is the land of pain, where wounds still bleed, where ancient curses still whisper. You had to face the parts of yourself you once avoided. You had to let parts of your ego die so a new soul could live. And when that old self died, you saw the truth clearly. There was nothing in you left for the old cycle to attach to, nothing left for it to feed on. Like an instrument with no strings, it cannot produce sound. Like a fire with no wood, it cannot continue to burn. This is not a temporary shift, it is a permanent break. That's why the temptations that once overwhelmed you now feel distant. What once made you tremble now carries no weight. What once stirred your desire is now just a fading shadow. You're no longer fighting with willpower. You've cut off the oxygen to the storm. And in that stillness, a miracle reveals itself. The chains that held generations before you no longer have any power over you. Some will look at you and say you've become cold. Some will say you've changed. But no, you've been remade. You are no longer a patched up old vessel. You are something entirely new. And because you have changed at the root, the past cannot return. The past can no longer reprogram you. The light still shines on that wide open field, and you continue walking. No more walls to confine you, no more blueprints to trap you. Everything ahead is like a blank canvas, where each step becomes a new line in the map. But now that the blueprint is gone, you realize something else. The battle hasn't ended. It has simply moved to a new place, a different dimension, a space they can no longer reach. The light ahead pulls you forward, like a road stretched across the void. And then you realize, the battle is still there, but it no longer takes place on the old ground. The place that was once a familiar battlefield, the land of chaotic emotions, tortured memories, and uncontrolled reactions, has become a wasteland. You are no longer present there, and it is your absence that confuses the enemy. They still wait for you to appear. They still bring their familiar attacks, their familiar traps. They set their ambushes on the old crossroads, but all they find is emptiness. You no longer walk the narrow path. You no longer step into the roads you once knew. You have withdrawn from their map. The battlefield has not disappeared. It has simply risen to a new level. You no longer fight at the frequency they once controlled. You have shifted into a space they cannot reach. And strangely, this shift has changed all the rules. Picture someone who has always lived in darkness. They know every corner of the dim room, every stone to lay a trap, every crack to hide in. In that darkness, they have the advantage. But one day, you step into the light. They remain in the dark, their eyes never used to the brightness. And when they try to find you, they realize you are no longer there. Psalm 27:1 says, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" You have left the stronghold of darkness and entered the stronghold of light. In that place, every attack becomes meaningless because they cannot find you anymore. Notice this: the insults, the provocations, the schemes, they still keep coming. But like letters sent to an old address, they are all returned, stamped, no longer at this address. They expect a reaction. They wait for an argument. They hope to see you fall into the trap again. But instead, they find only silence. And that silence is not avoidance. It is proof that you have changed the coordinates of the fight. You have learned a secret principle. Energy always seeks energy of the same kind. As long as you vibrated at the old level, you were easy to pull, easy to manipulate. But when you raised your frequency, when you changed your reactions, your focus, you stepped into a new field of vibration. In that field, they have no power. They can shout, but their echo no longer reaches you. At first, this unsettles them. They are used to chaos. Chaos has been both their weapon and their shield. They use it to shake you, then hide inside it to avoid facing the truth. But now, when you refuse to enter the chaos, both the weapon and the shield dissolve. This is the turning point. Because once they cannot reach you, they are left with only two choices: to retreat or to turn on each other. And whatever they choose, you are no longer caught in the spiral. You have brought the battle into your own territory, where peace, clarity, and strategy reign. From here, you no longer react. You choose. You are no longer pulled. You step forward by your own decision. And in that moment, you understand a deeper truth. Not every battle is meant to be fought. Sometimes victory does not come from defeating the enemy on their land, but from leaving that land entirely. You are no longer tied to their board, and because of that, you have freed yourself and the generations after you from an endless game. If you are hearing these words and feel something stir inside you, if you sense that you too are leaving the old battlefield to step into new light, mark this moment for your journey. Tap like to affirm to your soul that you have recognized this truth. Share it with someone still trapped in darkness, so they know there is a way out. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to stay connected, because this journey is not yours alone. It is a shared path, a call to countless souls finding their way home. When you do this, you are not just helping a YouTube channel grow. You are spreading a flame that must be kept alive to light the way for those lost in the night. And perhaps you will be the reason someone else finds their freedom. The light still stretches ahead. You keep walking, and the farther you go, the more you realize that your silence does not just confuse them, it renders their entire formula useless. They once believed you would always react the same way. They once thought every bait would pull the same result. But now, your unpredictability is shaking their foundation. They can no longer calculate your next move, and that is your power. To become the variable that breaks the cycle. Because a cycle needs repetition to survive, and you have become the one who makes it fall apart. They once believed that everything about you could be predicted. They had studied you for a long time. They knew how to ignite your anger, how to stir your sadness, how to keep you awake with worry. In their eyes, you were just another link in the chain that had repeated itself for generations. They thought you would follow the same old script, step into the same cycle your ancestors walked, repeating every movement in that sorrowful melody. But then something strange happened. You didn't react the way they expected. Where they anticipated rage, you responded with a quiet smile. Where they expected you to give up, you stood your ground. Where they hoped you'd beg for approval, you turned your back and walked away from the table. In that moment, you became the variable the number never accounted for in the equation. Cycles function through predictability. Like a clock, every gear turns along a familiar track. But when one gear suddenly spins in reverse, the whole system begins to shake. The formulas break. That is what you did. Through your stillness, through your unexpected choices, you caused structures that had run for decades, even centuries, to collapse in an instant. And the miracle is, you didn't do it in times of ease. Strength does not rise in comfort and safety. You found it in your darkest days, when it felt like everything was falling apart, when the night was so thick, no light could be seen. In that moment, awareness lit up inside you. You realized that nothing coming your way was random. Each situation was following a hidden script, hoping you would walk the same well-worn path. And when you saw it, you refused to take that step. You began to see the traps, before they snap shut. You saw what the cycle needed: your participation, your agreement, your repetition to keep itself alive. And you chose otherwise. One link broke, then another. The chains began to loosen. And once you became the variable, the formula collapsed, not just in your life, but in the lives of all those connected to you. Because when even one person breaks the script, the curse loses its absolute power. It can no longer call itself unbreakable. You are living proof that the code can be rewritten. Psalm 37:4 says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." When you chose not to follow the old script, you gave your heart to joy in God, not to the games of darkness. And in that moment, your deepest desire, the desire for freedom, was given to you as a sacred gift. Think about it. Those who came before you may have struggled. They may have fought. But in the end, many still fell at the very point the cycle had planned for them. They never got the chance to see the game turned upside down. But you did. You are not just part of the chain. You are the variable that breaks the chain. And because of you, a new testimony has been written into the flow of the soul. This does not make you proud. It makes you aware of the great responsibility you carry. Because when you become the variable, you also become the light for those still wandering in the dark. They look to you and see that the cycle is no longer absolute. They look to you and realize there is another choice. There is a path they never dared to believe was real. And maybe that is what darkness fears the most, that you have revealed the truth. That what it built was never destiny. It was just repetition. And when one person dares to choose differently, the veil begins to fall. What once looked eternal suddenly seems fragile. They will call you a rebel. They will try to smear your name. They will say, "You've lost your way." But deep down, they know the truth. You are the variable they cannot control. And when that variable appears, the cycle must bow. Ask yourself, how many times have you felt different when everyone around you followed the script, but you chose silence or love instead? How many times did you refuse to argue, refuse to compromise with falsehood, refuse to let fear lead you? That is the sign of a variable. That is the evidence that you carry a power the cycle never saw coming. And remember, when you become the variable, your power doesn't stop with you. It spreads. It opens doors for future generations, for those around you, for anyone who looks at you and believes change is possible. You are the disruption in the chain, and that disruption creates an entirely new path. The light on the road ahead still shines. You keep walking, knowing that every different choice you make is not just for yourself, but for the souls who never knew they could be different. And in your steps, a powerful silence surrounds you, because no one can calculate where you're going anymore. When you become the variable, the story is no longer just about breaking the formula. It reaches the very bloodline, to the places where fire was programmed to burn every time it was mentioned. And there, a new challenge begins, a sacred confrontation with the fuses that were wired into your very DNA. Within every bloodline, within every family story, there are invisible triggers, silent switches that, with a single touch, can ignite the sky. Sometimes, it's just a single word said at dinner. Sometimes it's a familiar accusation, a subtle gesture, weighted with the pain of generations. For years, it took nothing more than one pull, and the cycle would roar to life, sweeping everyone into a storm of anger, shame, and separation. These are the embedded fuses in the bloodstream programmed responses, like invisible wires passed down from parents to children, from grandparents to grandchildren. They don't require thought, they only need to be activated. And suddenly, old wounds flare up like fire, running through dry branches. You used to be part of that pattern. There were times when you didn't even see it coming. One moment you were calm, and the next, you were in a heated argument, reacting on autopilot. You'd ask yourself why you said the things that hurt others, why you repeated the very behavior you once vowed to avoid. And then came the guilt, the sinking spiral of regret. The cycle had worked exactly as it was designed to. But one day, you stopped. You no longer reacted the same way. When the trigger was pushed, you noticed it. You felt the heat rise to your throat, and then you chose silence. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of someone who sees the whole mechanism. You were no longer a machine running someone else's code. You had learned to step outside the stream of automatic responses. At first, your silence confused everyone. They were used to the script: someone says the line, and you explode. Someone touches the wound, and you react. But this time, they waited, and nothing happened. They pushed again. Then again, still, just quiet. And that silence became a mirror, forcing them to see themselves. And that made them uncomfortable. But do you know something? A fuse only has power if it leads to an explosion. If the wire is cut, if the fuel is gone, then the trigger becomes nothing more than a useless piece of plastic. And that is exactly what you did. You cut the wire. Never forget, this is not easy work. These triggers are not just in others' words. They live in your memories, in the emotions etched into your soul. They strike the real pain scars that never fully healed. But instead of letting them control you, you sat with them. You looked at them. You embraced them. And slowly, they melted in the light of awareness. Once the wound is healed, the trigger has no more power. Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." It was that very presence that stayed with you in the moment you felt like you could bear no more. And from that closeness, you found the strength to stay still, not to react, to let the trigger burn itself out in silence. When you did that, you weren't just freeing yourself, you were rewriting your entire bloodline. Because if one generation learns not to react, the next does not have to carry the old game anymore. Cycles require cooperation to survive. When you withhold that, they starve. They disconnect. They become useless. Think about this. You are not just healing yourself. You are setting the future free. When you refuse to argue, refuse to react, refuse to get pulled into chaos, you are handing your children, your loved ones, and even souls not yet born a completely different inheritance. An inheritance without triggers. And then, a new silence enters the room. In the place once filled with shouting, there is only stillness. In the relationship that once tormented you, there is only space. At first, that space feels strange. But slowly, it becomes a field, a place to breathe, to begin creating a new story. Others may look at you and not understand. Why don't you fight back? Why don't you defend yourself? Why don't you respond? But you know you are protecting something sacred, the peace of your soul. You have chosen not to participate in a game designed only to keep you spinning in circles. And when you choose that, the whole game collapses. This is revolutionary silence. It is not weakness. It is the purest form of strength. The strength of one who sees through illusion. The strength of one who realizes nothing is forcing you to play a part in a script that was never yours. The light shines through your bloodline now, down to the roots of memory. And as that light spreads, you witness something miraculous. The very triggers that once shattered your family have lost their grip. They are just rusted levers, disconnected from anything that matters. You have dismantled the system, and in that moment, you hear a whisper in your soul. It's time to rise to a new frequency. Because when you have cut the wires, when you have rendered the old triggers useless, what awaits you is not more of the same. It is the shift, a transition into a realm where the voices of the past can no longer find you. After the fuses in your bloodline lost their power to ignite, you began to notice something strange. Invisible echoes, sweet but dangerous invitations. They seemed to whisper from the shadows, trying to pull you back into the old spiral. No longer through loud arguments or familiar storms of anger, but through subtle signals, fleeting emotions, sudden temptations, strange coincidences that made it feel like fate was calling you back to where you used to be. These calls feel like phone rings from a number you used to know. They come in many forms: a sudden longing rising in the middle of the night, an old opportunity reappearing like bait, a buried memory rising with force. For many, it is not coincidence. It is a summons, a calling from the old cycles, from unseen contracts signed long ago in the bloodline. But then you made a different decision. You didn't just try to resist the call with willpower. You didn't rely on discipline to steer away. Because willpower still hears the ring, it just chooses not to answer. But you changed the whole number. You were removed from the contact list, and now the calls echo into the void, no longer reaching you. Imagine it. The system still runs. Calls are still being made every day. But your number has vanished from the network. The cycle still sends its messages, but they fall into silence, like voices echoing through an empty room. You no longer hear them. You no longer respond. This didn't happen by accident. It was the result of deep inner work. You healed the wounds that made you easy to summon. You removed the hooks that once made your soul tremble at the sound of an old melody. You severed the invisible agreements that gave the cycle permission to call your name. And then something incredible happened. A new silence appeared. You were surprised to feel the temptations that once made your heart race now pass by like a quiet breeze. The opportunities that once pulled you in now float by like clouds. What once made you cry now holds no claim on your heart. You no longer fight to resist, you simply don't hear the call. Psalm 40:3 says, "He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God." While the cycle still tries to reach you with old tunes, your soul has begun to sing a brand new song. And that song is so full of light, so full of truth, that no old melody can break through anymore. And here, you begin to sense something sacred, the sign of 111. This number appears as a reminder that you are standing at a new beginning. A doorway of the soul just opened. 111 is the symbol of rebirth, of a new program being written, one where you are no longer summoned by old cycles. It is the number of alignment and purpose, gently reminding you that every step from here is the first on a brand new path. If your heart resonates with 111, if you see it in dreams, in repeating moments, it is not by chance. It is confirmation from the higher realm that you have changed your frequency, that the old calls can no longer reach you. If you're hearing this and feel 111 knocking in your spirit, leave a sign, leave a comment to mark your journey. Because when you acknowledge it, you are signing a new soul contract, one of freedom. And remember, many have not yet changed their frequency. They still live as if their phone rings every day, still unconsciously picking up the same old calls, still walking the same worn path, still being pulled into the same cycle, wondering why nothing ever changes. But you are different. You are no longer on that list. You have moved to a frequency they cannot dial. And from this place, a strange peace begins to rise. No more sudden pulls, no more unexpected waves dragging you under. Your heart now beats to a different rhythm, the rhythm of freedom. And in that rhythm, you discover something powerful. It is not only you who has broken free, but your future too. And the ones who come after you are no longer being summoned. Because when one person changes frequency, the bloodline changes with them. When one person refuses to answer the calls lose their power. And when that power fades, a new chapter begins for the whole lineage. You walk forward now on wide open ground, breathing lighter than ever before. The old doors have closed, the old list has been deleted, and you no longer fear the invisible ring. But your journey is not over, because just beyond the threshold of 111, another challenge quietly awaits the test of facing the limits where your entire lineage once stopped. And now, you must show that you are not only the one who changed frequency, but the one who will move beyond the expiration date of the curse. The wide path continues to carry you forward, and with each step, you begin to feel something different, like a thick mist surrounding you. It's not the same challenge as the bloodline triggers. It's not the familiar echoes of the past. This is something else entirely. A quiet pressure, steady and patient, as if it has been waiting for you for a very long time. It is the expiration point of the curse, the breaking point that generations before you could not cross. Every family has a limit. In some bloodlines, every generation seems to collapse at a certain age, as if there's an invisible wall standing in the path. In others, people break when they reach a specific phase, middle age, parenthood, a peak of success, and somehow always fall back. The curse operates like a ticking clock, waiting for that exact moment to strike. You have felt that pressure. There were days you didn't think you could make it through. Your body and spirit weighed down by something invisible, like the ceiling of a room slowly lowering, forcing you down inch by inch. You knew how many in your family stopped here, how many dreams remained unfinished, how many promises broke, how many lives gave way at this exact point. But still, you kept walking. Every step felt like walking upstream, but you didn't stop. And one day, you crossed that invisible threshold, and the ceiling no longer came down. You had walked out of that room. You had moved past the wall that no one before you had ever crossed. This is the truth. The curse never wanted you to know. It is not immortal. It only survives when someone agrees to keep going in circles. It needs a generation to collapse, to continue feeding itself. But you refused to be its offering. You went beyond the point where it assumed you would fall. And when you kept going, the curse became disoriented. It had no one left to cling to. Psalm 91:7 promises, 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. Yes, you have watched many fall at the same place, but you were untouched. You walked beyond where they stopped, and that single act rewrote the spiritual map of your bloodline. Picture it, a raging river, and at one sharp bend, generation after generation got swept into the whirlpool. They believed that was the end of the road, but you paddled past it, and when you crossed, you discovered calm waters and golden shores on the other side. You didn't just save yourself, you opened a vision for others. The whirlpool is not the end. That moment made you a rupture point in history. Because once the curse can no longer get your agreement, it cannot continue. It starves, it stalls, it loses its power to regenerate. It becomes just a fading shadow, unable to bring down the next generation. You feel the weight lift from your body, like a breeze blowing through land once burdened. You know now you have crossed over, not just by strength, but by refusing to let bitterness, violence, or despair rule your heart. You walked through, but you didn't carry the poison with you, and that matters more than you think, because not everyone who walks through is truly free. Some still carry bitterness. Some bring addiction, resentment, or grief, and as they cross, they unconsciously pass it down. But you crossed without carrying the burden. You locked the door behind you. In that moment, you realize something deep: curses never maintain themselves. They only live through repeated agreements, through old choices, old reactions, and surrendering at familiar places. But you didn't do that. You refused to sign. And so, the curse expired. Now when you look back, you see a wall that has collapsed forever. Nothing can stop you there again. And more importantly, those who follow you no longer have to face it. You broke it. You opened the path. And now that path belongs to anyone who dares to walk it. The light of freedom rushes in, and you keep walking. You know the journey doesn't end here, because the cycle does not only bind through limits, it creates roles, scripts, characters it hopes you will play so the story can keep going. And the next test will not come from walls or whirlpools. It will come from the very roles you were forced to wear. As you cross the expiration point of the curse and keep walking, you begin to notice something more subtle. The cycle does not only rely on invisible limits to hold you back, it also builds a play where everyone has a role. One person cast as the victim, another as the controller, another as the betrayer. And there is one role you were always invited to play: the villain. Think of how many times you were pushed to the edge, provoked into saying or doing things you never wanted to. How many times you were drawn into becoming the one at fault, exactly as they said you would be. The cycle needs you to play that role to keep the story alive. Without a villain, the tragedy ends, and they never want the play to end. But you did something that made everything collapse. You refused the role. You stood at the edge of the stage, looked at the script handed to you, and calmly set it on fire. You no longer played by their rules. When they expected you to explode, you chose silence. When they expected you to bow, you lifted your head and walked away. When they expected you to react so they could justify themselves, you returned only stillness that left them speechless. At first, they were confused. They had rehearsed their lines, built their scenery, prepared every detail. They threw you the opening cue, expecting your usual closing response. But with no dialogue, the entire stage fell into an uncomfortable silence. And in that silence, the play collapsed. Psalm 23:5 says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows." While they wanted you to sit at their scripted table, God had already set another table for you, a table of peace and honor. You no longer need to fight for a villain's part. You already have a seat at the holy feast. When you refuse the villain's role, not only does their script collapse, but the entire emotional economy they built begins to fall apart. Because if you do not take the place they assigned, they have no one left to blame. They are forced to look at themselves, and that is what they fear most. Without you as their excuse, they must face the emptiness within their own soul. This does not mean your silence is weakness. On the contrary, this is the deepest power, the power of one who has nothing to prove, the power of one who has walked off the stage, burned the mask, and turned away from the theater. You are no longer an actor being directed. You are the author writing a new story. Sometimes they will try everything to pull you back. They will remind you of the past, They will create situations to make you lose your patience. They will build scenes where every eye is waiting for you to stumble. But when you no longer react, they realize the character they wanted to play with has vanished. They can keep acting, but it becomes a meaningless monologue, and that is the moment the cycle ends. A cycle cannot continue when its main character refuses to perform. You walk away from that stage, a lightness in your heart. The wind moves through your hair as if whispering, you no longer belong there. And you understand, the play will go on for those who still want to take part. But you are different. You have torn up your ticket. You have left the dark theater and stepped into the light where a new story waits to be written. A small flicker of fear crosses your heart. If I refuse, will I lose everything? Will they call me a traitor? Someone who no longer belongs? But then, a great peace covers you, because you realize what you are losing is only an illusion. What you are gaining is your true self, your true soul, no longer forced to wear a role. And in that stillness, something deeper begins to reveal itself. The play does not only survive through roles, but through the secret language it uses to bind people. A language made of tones, gestures, and emotional codes. To truly be free, you must recognize that language and choose not to speak it anymore. You step off the stage, leaving behind lines never spoken, leaving behind the scripts others wrote for you. But as you walk in the light, you begin to see. The play does not survive only on roles. It lives on an invisible language, a language woven from tones, gestures, glances, and emotional codes, so subtle that few ever notice them. You remember the old days, when a certain tone of voice would make your heart race, your face flush, and words spill out before you could stop them. A fake apology, a contemptuous glance, a perfectly timed silence, each one like a code, triggering a reaction. That was the language of the cycle, a language you had unconsciously spoken all your life. But one day, you stopped and began to look closer. You saw clearly that these were not random moments. They were button presses, every word, every gesture, a signal designed to spark fear, anger, or guilt inside you. And once you saw it, you stood at a crossroads, continue speaking the same language, and keep the cycle alive, or choose silence, a silence that no longer replies. The first time you chose silence, it was not easy. Inside you, the old part still wanted to shout, to explain, to defend. But you held your tongue, felt your heartbeat, and let the moment pass. What happened? The cycle faltered. Without your response, the language became meaningless. Imagine a radio broadcasting signals, expecting a response from another machine. But you've turned yours off. The waves still go out, but there's no one listening. The codes are sent, but nothing decodes them. The language dies the moment no one speaks it back. Psalm 46:10 reminds us, "Be still and know that I am God." Your stillness is not defeat, it is awakening. In that stillness, you hear another voice, the voice of the Creator, calling you out of the tangled language into the language of light and truth. You start to discover a secret. Each time you choose not to answer, you cut a cord. Each time you keep still, you loosen another link. This is not the silence of fear. This is the silence of one who has learned there is nothing to prove. Truth does not need shouting. Truth only needs you to stand. At first, this silence unsettles others. They are used to seeing you flare up. They are used to hearing your explanations. Now, they are like actors, standing on stage, speaking their lines to an audience that no longer responds. The emptiness makes them uncomfortable. They repeat the old words, louder, harsher, hoping to draw you back. But when you remain still, they realize their entire language has lost its power. This silence also changes you. When you are no longer forced to react, you begin to see reality more clearly. The attacks no longer touch your heart. You see them as characters, scrolling across a screen, just data, no power. You no longer strain to resist. You simply no longer read that language. Remember, your silence is not empty. It is full of strength. Like a mountain standing tall, it does not shout, yet its presence speaks volumes. The mountain does not argue with the wind. Its existence is proof enough. And so it is with you. Your silence is your loudest voice, declaring the cycle has lost its control. Slowly, you notice something miraculous. As the old language loses its grip, your mind begins to hear a new one, the language of peace. The whispers of spirit rise within you, not loud, not hurried, but gentle, like the breeze. You begin to speak with light, with kindness, with calm. And in this new language, the old cycle has no place to survive. Others may not understand. They may think you are weak, afraid to speak. But you know you are learning a higher language. And this silence is not only your weapon, it is liberation for those who will follow. Because when one person refuses to speak the language of darkness, the next generation never has to learn it. In this light, you realize something profound. Silence does not mean stillness. In silence, you have already changed the whole game. And from the deepest place in your soul, you feel a new movement forming. Not only is the old language collapsing, but the very energy that once fed it is drying up. Because when you refuse to respond, you refuse to give away your energy. And without energy, no cycle can survive. You are preparing to step into a new stage, where you will see a powerful truth with your own eyes. The old pattern was never self-sustaining. It only lived on the energy you once unknowingly gave it. And now, as you draw that energy back, the whole system begins to fade, like an oil lamp running out of fuel. When you stop answering the old language, something strange begins to happen. The whirlwinds that once raged like storms grow weak, as if they were never self-sustaining at all, but existed only because of the energy you unconsciously fed them. Every time you grew angry, they grew stronger. Every time you feared, they held on tighter. Every time you tried to explain or prove yourself, they drank strength straight from your soul. But now, you have cut off that flow. You no longer feed them with fear. You no longer water them with anger. You no longer nourish them with the struggle of defending yourself. And the result is that they wither. No more echoes, no more endless storms. They retreat like parasites that have lost their host. This is a truth darkness never wanted you to know. They are not as powerful as you thought. They are only feeders, living off your energy. They need you to survive. When you refuse to give them your energy, they dissolve. Psalm 62:1 whispers, "Truly my soul finds rest in God. My salvation comes from Him." In that rest, you have pulled your energy out of the old games. Instead of giving it to binding patterns, you place it in His presence, the one source that never runs dry, never deceives. And in that moment, a sacred seal appears. 444. This number feels like a stamp from heaven, reminding you that you are walking on solid ground now, no longer shaken by chaotic winds. 444 is the symbol of protection and of a new foundation, like 4 strong walls surrounding a temple, like the 4 corners of the earth held steady by the hands of God. It comes to assure you that you no longer carry yourself alone. There is a holy foundation covering you. If you are hearing and feeling 444 resonate in your heart, let it be your confirmation that you have stepped out of the fragile ground. Write the number down. Share it as a sign that you are being rebuilt from a new foundation. Because each time you declare it, you affirm the truth. No force can shake a foundation laid by the hand of the divine. You realize that when the old energy flow was cut, you truly take ownership of your energy. You get to choose where it will go. Instead of wasting it on fruitless arguments, you use it to nurture creativity. Instead of pouring it into worry, you plant seeds of peace. Instead of giving it to fear, you use it to light your faith. And you see clearly. The cycle does not end with an explosion. It dies in silence. It fades day by day, until one morning you wake and realize there is nothing left to fight. The enemy still tries, but every scheme strikes empty air. You have become invisible to the tools they once used. This also throws their whole system into confusion, because if you no longer supply the energy, they must find another source. And when they cannot, they turn on each other, like predators in a city with no food left. You do not need to fight, because the collapse is already happening inside them. All you need to do is stand firm, holding the peace you have found. You realize something profound. Through this journey, you have not only learned to protect yourself from energy drains, you have learned to direct it. Your energy no longer wanders into old pits. It has become a river with purpose, flowing toward the light, watering new seeds. And in that direction, you see that it's not only small patterns being cut, An entire invisible economy, a dark marketplace trading in emotions, fear, and power, is trembling. Because that marketplace only exists when people exchange. When you stop participating, the market empties out. And from here, a complete collapse is about to begin. The light in your heart bursts forth, filling the space around you. You know that your next step is no longer just to protect yourself, but to witness the collapse of an entire system. A system built on pain, on fear, on the bargaining of souls. And now, that system is trembling, waiting for its end. You begin to see the truth, as if a great curtain is being drawn back. All this time, the cycle has not only existed as a personal shadow, it has also been an invisible economy, a spiritual night market, where fear, shame, and anger are traded like currency. There, every time you erupted in anger, a profit was recorded for the darkness. Every time you sank into guilt, a new transaction was completed. Every time you yielded to fear, another gain was added to its books. You never saw that night market with your physical eyes, but you felt it in your soul. You sensed you were paying some vague price every time you walked away from a draining argument, or every time you swallowed a bitter silence just to keep peace. That price was never money. It was energy. It was light. It was your peace. It was an economy built on the exchange of emotions. But when you cut off your energy, the entire system began to tremble, because you were not a small customer. You were one of its major suppliers. Someone the darkness relied on to sustain the balance of the market it had built. Now that you've withdrawn, those still inside the system panic. They search for you, trying every way to rekindle anger, fear, shame in you, but nothing answers back. Like a market losing a massive flow of capital, that spiritual night market begins to crash. And then you witness something strange. Without you to exploit, they turn on each other. Those who once collaborated now compete and tear at one another, because the resources have become scarce. The dark economy that once ran on predictability and habit now collapses on itself. Psalm 9-9 echoes, "The Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble." You understand now that when you step out of the game, you not only escape, you find a real refuge, an entirely different system, the system of justice and peace, where there is no bargaining, only grace. And at this moment, a powerful sign appears, 555. This number is not an accident. It arrives like a shift of wind, signaling that the great change is now irreversible. 555 is the number of sacred transformation, of doors opening into a new journey, where you are no longer bound by old structures. It is a reminder that the change you are undergoing is not only for you, but for the spiritual space around you. If you are hearing and seeing 555 show up in your life on clocks, in dreams, or in random sequences, take it as confirmation. You are not stumbling into this upheaval by chance. You are being guided. And if the number resonates in your heart, comment it, share it, declare it, to affirm that you are ready to step through the new doorway. Because once you agree, heaven and earth agree with you. You start to realize the collapse of the dark economy does not come from a fiery battle. It comes from lack from you and others like you, refusing to keep paying. No buyers, the market closes. No exchange, the night market falls apart. Darkness may try to sustain itself, but it is left with an empty stage. No audience, no actors. And in that collapse, something else is revealed. Your old identity is dissolving as well. Because the darkness not only took your energy, it pinned you with labels, roles, definitions to keep you bound. But when the market collapses, those labels fall off too. You are no longer the failure, the guilty one, the child who is always wrong. You become something else, a person with a new identity, no longer on the old map. Light surrounds you, and you know you have gone too far to turn back. The old market has closed, and you feel no regret. Instead, your heart fills with hope, because you sense a truth. Your new identity is forming, along with a new place for you on the spiritual map. No one can find you where you once stood, because you have been moved to another coordinate, another dimension. And in that shift, you prepare to step into a new phase, discovering that the old map has no more value, because you yourself have been moved to a place where no enemy can reach you. You walk on the new road, feeling clearly that you are no longer at the same coordinate as before. The arrows that once pierced you now fall into empty ground. The attacks that once shook you now find no place to land. The enemy still aims at the shadow of who you used to be, but it is all in vain, because the one they seek no longer exists. It is like someone trying to send a letter to a house that has been torn down. The envelope bears the old address, the stamp pressed with confidence, but the mail carrier can only return it marked, "No longer at this address." You have changed your address. More than that, you have changed your dimension. In the language of the soul, this is not just a change of behavior. It is a change of frequency and coordinates. You no longer live at the crossroads of fear and doubt. You have been moved to another land where peace and purpose meet. And because you have shifted, no matter how skilled your enemies are at tracking, their arrows now fly into nothingness. Psalm 91:1 affirms, "Whoever dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." That is your new coordinate, not a street address on earth, but a position under His wings. When you dwell there, every attack becomes meaningless because it cannot pass through the wall of divine protection. You realize that changing coordinates does not mean you have vanished from life. You still live, work, love, and walk among others, but your soul has moved house. You no longer run on the old operating system. You no longer speak the old language. You no longer vibrate at the frequency the darkness can hear. This makes you invisible to weapons that once worked so well. And then, a sign appears in your journey. 777. This number does not arrive by chance. It is a seal from heaven. 777 is the number of sacred completion, of deep awakening. It signals that you have entered a stage where you are not just surviving, not just breaking cycles, but opening your soul to touch the mysteries of the universe. This is no longer a private battle. This is union with a divine frequency that the whole cosmos sings. If you feel 777 resonate in your heart, let it become your declaration. I am awake. Comment this number not to boast, but to affirm that you belong to this flow. When you proclaim it, you not only strengthen your own journey, but also become a lighthouse for other souls searching for their way. Now you understand. You no longer have to fight as before. The battle has changed because you have changed. No more rushing into arguments. No more bracing yourself against storms. No more being pulled into familiar spirals. You have stepped outside, and from this higher ground you see the entire play. You are no longer a pawn on the board. You are the one looking from above, realizing the board itself was an illusion. This freedom is not only for you, it is a living testimony that the cycle can be broken. It is a silent message to all who are still trapped. The path out exists. You do not have to repeat it anymore. And your mere presence in this freedom is enough to shake the cords binding others. Psalm 126:1-2 says, "When the Lord brought back the captives of Zion, we were like those who dreamed. Then our mouths were filled with laughter, our tongues with songs of joy." Yes, your freedom is like a dream come true, something no one dared to believe, now rising as a new song. You look back on the journey from the bloodline triggers, to the invisible calls, to the expiration point of the curse, to the scripts written for you. All of it once seemed like an unbreakable web, but now it is only ashes. While you stand firm on the foundation of 444, step into the transformation of 555, and now touch the awakening of 777. 3 numbers, like 3 seals carved into your path, proof that you have not walked alone, that you have always been guided, and you know this story is not over. Because your freedom is not a full stop, but an open-ended sentence. It is an invitation for others to walk to. It is a torch you carry, ready to hand to anyone willing to leave the darkness. You smile, breathe deeply, and feel the stillness surrounding you. No more chains, no more old maps, only the open sky and a gentle whisper in your soul. Keep going. The light you carry cannot be extinguished. And you know, this journey is not just a victory. It is a revolution within the soul, a beginning with no end, where you become a living testimony that every cycle can be broken, every darkness can be illuminated, and every soul can find its way home. And so the journey comes to a close, not like a book slammed shut, but like a door opening wide before you. From those first steps in the dark, through the hidden battles in your bloodline, the invisible calls, the binding scripts, all the way to the shift of frequency and the relocation of your soul's coordinates, you have walked a full circle only to return to yourself. But not the old self, a new self, radiant, free, and unshakable. Look back. You have broken patterns that generations believed could never be crossed. You have let the old parts die so the new soul could live. You have learned the language of silence and turned it into a weapon. You have cut off the darkness's energy supply and collapsed an entire invisible economy. And you have stepped into the sacred seals, 444, 555, 777 each number, a heavenly stamp, proof that you have not walked alone, that you have been guided and protected throughout the journey. Psalm 118:5 says, "In my distress I called to the Lord, and he answered me and set me in a spacious place." That spacious place is here. It is this moment you are breathing, where no chain can bind you anymore. And now, you are not just a survivor. You are a living testimony that every cycle can be broken, every darkness can be illuminated, and every soul can find its truth again. Your freedom does not stop with you. It is a lamp, a seed, a song for all who are still searching for their way out. So if this journey has touched your heart, let it go farther. Click like as a declaration that you have heard your own calling. Share it so another soul can find the way out of the dark. Subscribe so you don't miss the next reminders, the next flames, for the next steps. And leave a comment with the sacred number you feel most resonant with, 444, 555, or 777, as a seal you press into the eternal flow. Because this story is not just mine. It is not just yours. It is ours, the chosen ones, the awakening souls. And as we walk together, the light will spread into corners where hope has never been. May blessing, peace, and holy light walk with you. Keep moving forward. Keep carrying the torch. And remember, your freedom cannot be taken, for it has been written by the hand of the Creator himself. Grateful that you chose to spend these moments in the light of this story. If it touched your soul, please like, share, and subscribe, and ring the bell so the next whisper of light may find its way back to you.